Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to my show. Let's jump right into my ever-popular DB Cooper question and comment videos. Here's a question from John DeLorean asking about Tina Mucklow not ruling out Kenny Christensen based on his photo. So my understanding is that when she ruled out people like Richard Floyd McCoy and Sheridan Peterson, it was sometime relatively not long after the skyjacking in 1971, although it seems that it took the FBI a long time to release that information. In the case of Kenny Christensen, he was not identified as a suspect until his brother saw a documentary about the D.B. Cooper case in 2003. In my video, I may have stated that Tina Mucklow was asked about the identification. If I said that, I might have misspoken based on what is on the Wikipedia article, although I may have gotten the information from someplace else. Anyway, I don't know if she's commented to the FBI about Kenny Christensen's photo. It looks like what Wikipedia says is the other flight attendant is the one with the reported comments about the identification. So, in this case, let's remember that the book proposing Kenny Christensen as Cooper was published in 2010. The skyjacking took place in 1971. That's almost 40 years prior. I don't know how many photos of Kenny Christensen there are. I haven't seen a whole lot of them, maybe 3 or 4 as an adult. And personally, I don't think that he looks anything like those sketches that we have of Cooper. So how much credence should we give to one of the flight attendants not ruling out Kenny Christensen 40 years after the fact? I think you'll have to make that decision on your own. But depending on your age, think back decades ago to somebody that you met once, perhaps somebody that talked to you on a Greyhound bus for a few hours 40 years ago. How good would your memory be of that? And remember, Schaffner only saw Cooper on the flight from Portland to Seattle. She was not the one sitting next to him. That was Tina Mucklow, and she was not on the flight that departed Seattle for Reno. And lastly, on the topic of Kenny Christensen, I think that he is actually the weakest candidate of anyone who's been proposed. The whole basis of the story is based on his brother stating that Kenny, on his deathbed, told him that he had a secret that he wished he could tell, but he couldn't. I and many other people believe that the secret, no doubt, was Kenny Christensen was gay. Simple as that. Christensen's brother at the time didn't suspect anything, evidently. It was only years later, after watching a D.B. Cooper documentary, that he concluded his brother's untold secret must have been that he was a skyjacker. All of the other supposed evidence doesn't hold up. People state after the skyjacking, Kenny bought a house for $200,000 with cash. That is not at all accurate. There are scans of the mortgage documents online that show that he took something like 19 years to pay off the house. Also, if you were going to hijack a plane, you're not going to do it against your own company, where you could be recognized by people who are basically your co-workers. That doesn't make any sense. And after the skyjacking, Kenny Christensen continued working for Northwest Orient Airlines. Here's another one. That is not what the FBI does, actually, LOL. Unfortunately, sometimes I'm not quite sure if people's comments are factual statements made humorously or just outright jokes. I think as far as the job of investigating the interstate skyjacking of an airliner, I think that is probably one of the jobs that the FBI does. It certainly seems that they're the ones who do that in the past. Our next question is from Matt's Customs Creations. By the way, when people message me with questions or comments and they have their own YouTube channel, I often will check it out. After you watch this video and hopefully hit the subscribe button and like it and maybe leave a comment, please go over to Matt's channel and check out what he has. So he writes, "What I have yet to see is anything about the man himself. What was he like? Where did he live, etc.? Where was he at the time?" Those are certainly the big questions about Vince Peterson. And I have mentioned in some of my videos about the titanium tie that it would be interesting to know what the son says about his father being present or absent at Thanksgiving 1971. As far as Vince Peterson, to recap for anybody who doesn't know, based on evidently 3 particles of a titanium alloy found on the tie that Cooper is believed to have left behind on Flight 305, a researcher has tied that tie to a laboratory that dealt with titanium at a company called RemCrew in Pennsylvania, and argues that there were only 8 people in the lab working on it, and has identified Vince Peterson as D.B. Cooper. Now, what connects Vince Peterson to D.B. Cooper? Only those 3 particles, which I argue in all of my videos on that topic must be treated very skeptically for many reasons, including the fact that other people throughout the world were working with that particular alloy or could have been working with that particular alloy. Also, Vince Peterson looks somewhat like the sketches we have of Cooper, although he has a lot more hair long after 1971. And his skin tone was much lighter than Cooper's, who was described as either being swarthy or having Indian or Mexican blood or Italian ancestry. There does not seem to be any other circumstantial evidence. My understanding was Peterson, who is deceased, was about 50 years old at the time of the skyjacking, which was 51 years ago. So let's say he was about 100 now. Fairly recently, I think within the last year, his son was asked about the allegations of his father being Cooper, which he seems not to believe. I'm guessing that it's likely that Vince Peterson had this son when he was between 25 and 30 years old. And if Vince Peterson is now roughly 100 years old, this son would be approximately 70 to 75 years old. That means that he was probably 20 to 25 years old at the time of the skyjacking. Very likely he was living at home, visiting home from college, or lived in the area where his parents lived, and therefore likely would have attended Thanksgiving 1971. It would be interesting for somebody to ask the son if he was with his parents at Thanksgiving in 1971 and was his father there. If Vince Peterson was D.B. Cooper, then it would have been difficult, but not impossible, for him to have jumped from the plane, survived, made it to an airport, not be recognized as the infamous skyjacker from the day before, and then flew from Portland, Oregon to Pennsylvania, and then made it back home by Thanksgiving dinner the next day. Anyway, great question, and I think that while the son seems to be still alive, more work needs to be done so that Vince Peterson can be cleared, because I think he, just like Kenny Christensen, is an extremely weak candidate for being D.B. Cooper. So here's a question from Buffalo Rick, who provides a lot of insightful comments. I've watched what I believe are all the Dan Gryder D.B. Cooper related uploads. Just to remind everybody, Florence Schaffner and Tina Mucklow were the 2 flight attendants on the night of the skyjacking. I don't know if Florence is more reluctant than Tina to discuss the case. From what I've read, Tina joined a convent and disappeared from public sight for many years, and still tries to avoid any media contact because of the profound psychological impact that the skyjacking had on her. So, to answer your question, I don't know, but I think that it brings up a good point. Just as I argue over and over again, we need to be careful on what we believe are accurate facts and statements about the case. There is so much that we do not know definitively about the events and clues. A lot of facts and conclusions seem to be contradictory, and much of what we Cooper enthusiasts hear and know is based on other people writing books or blog posts where we don't truly know what the facts are, but we're relying on the authors of those works to be representing the facts accurately. I know that many people want to discount any information provided by the FBI, but then you're relying on somebody who wrote a book who claims that they interviewed somebody and that person said something. But of course, everybody else who wrote a book comes up with a different conclusion, sometimes radically different. And every book you read or every video that you watch seems to make their particular candidate look like they're really Cooper. But only one of these people, at the most, could be Cooper. They can't all be D.B. Cooper, the hijacker. Again, thank you for bringing up that point. Okay, I think I will end on this great question and comment from John. I think as far as the money got into circulation, would it be detected? I think you make some valid points there. Just to state my beliefs in the case, I believe that it's likely that Cooper did not survive the jump. I've speculated that potentially he did not intend to survive the jump, but even if he did, I think he probably ended up in the Columbia River. I do not know if the chute opened up or not. It could be that for whatever reason it malfunctioned. He ended up in the river and drowned. Since the bag of money was tied to him, I believe that it and he ended up on the bottom of the river. When the dredge came by, some of the money was sucked up through the hose and later deposited at a place called Tina Bar. Researchers speculate that the nozzle of the dredge was too narrow to suck up larger objects such as Cooper's body. I think finding any money at that location is strong evidence that all of the money ended up in the river. Many people have written to me over the past few months arguing that they think that the money somehow was either planted by Cooper, who survived, or else he lost 3 packets of money but was able to retain the rest of it, survived, and then spent the money, whereby none of it was ever detected in circulation. I don't buy that, and I think that believing that Cooper intentionally buried some of the money in the sand, hoping that somebody would find it, and that would be some alibi that made it look like he did not survive, but in fact did, is not credible. And it was 9 years after the skyjacking that the money happened to be randomly found by an 8-year-old digging a hole in the sand. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, that I don't believe that Cooper survived, but I'm certainly open to the fact that I may be wrong and that Cooper may have survived. As far as could the money, approximately 9,700 bills, enter circulation and go undetected, including not being detected when it ends up back at the Federal Reserve or the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, where it is eventually destroyed, which happens to worn out currency. I don't know. I've tried to research this, and I haven't found any information that indicates at that time that serial numbers would have been recorded prior to destruction of notes. My understanding is there was a reward out there for people identifying notes from the ransom, and I think at least one news outlet, Newsweek, had a higher reward than what the government or the airliner's insurance company was offering. So people certainly had some incentive to look for the serial numbers. But again, as you point out, the information was provided on dozens of pages in non-sequential order, which just not necessarily is the most effective way of communicating those numbers to people. If any of my viewers worked in an actual position where they would have had information on whether serial numbers were actively checked by banks or the Federal Reserve or another government agency at the time, in particular when they were being sent back to Washington, D.C. to be destroyed once the notes wore out, I would love to hear from you. I've had a number of other people comment on my videos about them surmising that the money went into circulation in other countries. Certainly U.S. currency is found in other countries and often is held by residents as a tool to maintain wealth, as some countries' currencies' values consistently decline over time. As somebody who has lived and traveled overseas, in particular in Russia and Eastern Europe, and throughout a number of countries in Western Europe, I can tell you that in many countries, locals will not even accept local currency, which is too soiled, torn, or written on, much less foreign currency, including U.S. dollars. The currency that Cooper was given, of course, is still valid, as is all U.S. currency, but the design is the former design, and most of the dates were dated 1969. Some of them had the date 1936 on them, although that was the series date, not the actual printing date. I can assure all of my viewers that there is not a large population of 50-plus-year-old obsolete-style $20 bills actively circulating outside the United States. And again, I don't believe that Cooper survived, but if he did and lost 3 bundles but retained the rest, could they have ended up in a safe deposit box in Canada 50 years ago and they're still sitting there? Yes. That's certainly a possibility, although I think it's a very low possibility. As far as the Kennedy assassination, I'm glad to see that you agree that Oswald acted alone. That's one of those cases where there's so much circumstantial evidence that looks like the CIA could have been involved, or the FBI could have been involved, or the Secret Service could have been involved, or the KGB could have been involved, or the Cubans could have been involved, or the Mafia could have been involved, or the military-industrial complex had him killed because they wanted to escalate the war in Southeast Asia, but they could not have all been involved. And that shows the problem in all of these cases, where on the face of it, without many facts, the circumstantial evidence from what clues we have tend to lead in one direction, but often that leads away from the actual truth. I think that Lee Harvey Oswald was a deeply disgruntled, complex person who ended up shooting the president, without a conspiracy being involved. I used to work with an older guy who believed that it was a conspiracy, but he had no real evidence of a conspiracy. But he admitted that he could just not accept the fact that one single guy killed a president who later on became such a beloved icon. And remember, Kennedy was not well liked by a large percentage of the population at the time. But just because you cannot accept that this bright shining light was snuffed out before its time doesn't mean that there was a vast conspiracy to kill him. So yeah, perhaps I will do some videos on the Kennedy assassination in the future, but I'm also interested in Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and the Zodiac cases, so I have a lot on my plate for the time being. Thanks again to all of my viewers for sending in these questions and comments. I really do appreciate them. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, click the like button, and leave a comment if you're so moved. Thanks so much for watching.